All right, everyone. Here we are. We're live, and I'm about to pull off something that, as little as 10 or 15 years ago, only a true James Bond supervillain would have been able to do, which is to take control of the airwaves and broadcast themselves all over the place. Um, I've got a ooh, I have to turn that off. We're live, and I'm about to pull off something that, as little as 10 or 15 years ago, only a true James Bond supervillain would have been able to. There we go. All right. Bear with me. It's the first time I've done this. Last time I did a live broadcast, it was when I was launching the cash flow forecasting and business plan writing program. And it was Google Hangouts was the interface then. And so now the interface is through Zoom, which is what is going to allow me to have guests come just like a normal Zoom meeting if you've ever been on one. So here are some of the things I'd like to point out to you guys is that there is a delay. So there's a 20-second delay between what I am saying in the real world and what you guys are watching out there. So I'm just going to send an email out to the list, which will go onto Twitter and Facebook to let everyone know that we're starting. You can comment on the YouTube feed, on the side of the feed, but I will see that 20 seconds after you type. Yes, that's how it works. So if you type a question or a comment in there and I don't respond to it right away, that's why. There's a 20-second delay. Perfect. Let me get my screens all set up here and we can get started. All right. So if you're out there and you're listening live, and I can see that there are people already starting to filter into the room, would someone just put something in the comments, because I just want to see that I'm able to see it. The first guest that I have lined up is going to be Mike Finger, who is from exitoasis.com. And Mike has been on my channel a few times talking about helping people get ready to sell their businesses. And so what I've asked each of my guests to prepare for today is a little bit of a story about something that's interesting that's happened to them in the past year, or like a story regarding a client. And we're also going to maybe talk a little bit about what we expect for 2020. And I've also dug up a few things that I have on a screen here, some interesting news stories that I think will be kind of interesting if there are any gaps in the conversation as we move forward. But to begin with, I want to remind everyone, this is on YouTube, and a lot of the people that are subscribers on YouTube are not on my email list. And earlier today, I actually had a conversation with a fellow. It was the 9th holiday chat call that I recorded for the holiday chat feature this season. And so for those of you who don't know, holiday chat is when people get to buy one of my consulting calls, an hour-long consulting call at a severe discount. But in exchange for getting the discount, I use that call and put it out on the YouTube channel and the podcast. However, it's only released to people that are on my email list. So if you are not on my email list, go sign yourself up either at my blog site, davidcbarnett.com, or directly at davidcbarnettlist.com. You can check off the categories of things you're interested in. And whenever I send out emails, which often is every day, I only send them to the people whose interests align with the topic of the email. So, let me see here. I see. Hey, I'm starting to see the comments. That's great, guys. So remember, there's a little bit of a delay, but I see Don Luis Guerra. Any plans on doing training in Chicago? I would love to come to Chicago. I was in Chicago a couple of years ago. I took a big train trip from Portland, Maine to San Francisco. And of course, had a couple of hours in Chicago. I went to the art museum and to this place. It was like this deli on a street with the L train going over it. And they had all these old pictures from like 1930s, 40s, 50s of all these performers, including Marilyn Monroe. Apparently it's a famous place. I can't remember the name of it. But people would go in there and have dinner when they were performing in the local nightclub. So it was really cool. I remember the food though. It was this amazing hamburger. And I see Damien and I see Victor Haven. Loving my book, Franchise Warnings. Thanks, Victor. One of the things we have lined up here today to talk about actually is a franchise opportunity that someone had sent in a question about. And Vince, I see you on there too. So yeah, Mike should be here any minute. What I did is I staggered the guests to come in at different times, and there's going to be overlap between them. And in my mind, what I was thinking was, like the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and different guests coming in and talking with each other. We'll see. We'll see at the end if it's anything like the Tonight Show. But the idea is for it to be very lighthearted and to give people, because there's so many people out there who end up having to travel over the holiday period, is to give people something that they can, if they can't watch live, to download and listen to when they're driving in the car and stuff. And we are going to be talking about business stuff, which of course is what I'm interested in. And my 4 guests that I have coming today are all interested in business. And I know that you guys are interested in business too. So let me see. I'm just going down my list here. Holiday chats, 20-second delay. Mike Finger is going to be on any moment. And as we're talking, if you guys have any questions, comments, or want to bring things up, yeah, feel free to use the comment box there on YouTube. Victor, you mentioned franchise warnings. It's interesting. Whenever I go into the Amazon backdoor, like the place where authors can go to see the sales and things, what's interesting, there's Mike. What's interesting is that I can actually see the sales levels of the different books, and the majority of book sales are Kindle and audiobook. But as we get closer to Christmas, I can see paperbacks and what they call expanded distribution, because people can walk into any independent bookstore or Barnes and Noble or any kind of bookstore and ask for one of my books, and it will actually get shipped out by Amazon. Mike, can you hear me?
I can. David, how are you?
Great. Merry Christmas.
Same to you. Same to you. Coming through okay, I hope?
Yeah, well, I think so. I was just telling everyone that 15 years ago, you had to be a real James Bond supervillain to pull off like a global broadcast like this. And now I can do it with my Zoom subscription.
Right. It's crazy, isn't it?
I even decorated.
Well, so did I. I tried to come up with the best, most festive picture I could come up with. And it was the one you used to promote the YouTube Live.
The antler.
It made me smile.
Those antlers were given to me. Do you have the Progress Club where you are?
It doesn't ring a bell for me.
It's a service club. It's like Rotary or Kiwanis.
Sure.
And so there's a chapter of the Progress Club here in town. And one of the big events that they do every year is the Antler Breakfast. And so it's right downtown at one of the big hotels, and all the business people that work in the offices all go to this thing. And you buy a ticket, it's $15, and you're served breakfast and all kinds of breakfast food there. But when you go in, everyone is handed one of those sets of antlers and you have to put it on. And so like the mayor and all the radio station people and all the bankers, everybody's sitting there with these silly antlers on. And this year there was no school on that day. So I brought the kids, and I could tell that they were really impressed. Like, oh, wow, this is crazy. All these grownups in their suits and ties wearing these silly antlers. So
what a great equalizer, right? We all look ridiculous, and let's have a good time.
So how has 2019 been for you?
2019 has been good. I've learned a lot. I've seen a lot of activity and growth. No, it's been a great year. How about for you?
It's been a year of growth for me as well. All the different things that I do have seen an increase.
Yeah.
But the big question I wanted to ask you, because you used to be a business broker and I used to be a business broker.
Yep.
And I took what I learned from being a business broker to try to create a new kind of business for myself. And so have you. And you're working with sellers to help them get their business prepared, and then helping them choose the right method or in some cases a broker to help sell. And how has it been trying to create something new for you?
Oh man, it's so funny you should ask that. I promised myself after the last startup I did, never again, right? because there's just so many unknowns and so many things that you start and you think this idea's got to work, and then you see that it works, but it just half works, and it's the half you didn't expect. It gets weird really, really fast. It's one of those things where it was an idea and a concept, and I knew if I just let it sit in my head, it was just going to ferment until my head exploded. And so it was time to get out there. The reception has been great. I've been thrilled with the feedback. 2020 is going to be a double down year for me on content. Clearly the need is out there for the message, and that puts me in the place not dissimilar to where you are, where you have to penetrate people's attention, and that's always challenging.
So how has the appetite in the market been different from what you thought people would want from you?
I anticipated that there would be a fairly engaged reception from professionals in the industry, and that has proven to be true. My sense is that there's a lot of brokers out there. The messaging is resonating for. From the very beginning, when I sat down with the concept, I knew that the challenge was going to be, how do you sell medicine to people who don't know they're sick? And that's where I was as a small business owner, thinking certain things about what it meant to exit a business based on my ignorance at the time. I didn't know what I didn't know. And so the wall to overcome there is a big one. Right. Once it clicks for a business owner, once they decide I'm interested in selling, well, now they're just voracious, right? And they want everything, and they want direction, and they want to do it right. And that's fabulous. For the business owner who hasn't made that choice, how you engage them and help them to recognize that the advantage of getting ahead of this is massive. It's the difference between being able to sell and not being able to sell. That, though, is a huge challenge. And again, having sat in that business owner chair for years, I have fires on my desk that are burning, that people are coming into my office and throwing gasoline on, and figuring out how to sell the business is not one of them. That has an advocacy of one, and he's busy.
Well, it's funny because along the same lines, the way I always thought about it when I had my brokerage office open, because I was trying to get their attention because I wanted to list their business for sale. Selling the business is a top level strategic kind of thing. And the amount of time that most small businesses owners apply to top level strategic things is very limited, because they're typically filling in many C-level roles as well as middle management roles. And sometimes they're doing work in the business, right? And so if they've got all of these different roles that are mission critical to making the till ring, with money, whatever gets addressed in that tiny amount of time they can apply to that top strategic level of thinking there's not much that can happen in there. And oftentimes there's other things, like you say, that can squeeze out the topic. Do we need to replace a vehicle? Do we need to borrow money? Do we need to go to the bank? Do we need so many things that only the owner can do, and they don't have the time typically. They're very busy.
Absolutely. And what's been fascinating to me over the last year has been how my thinking about this has evolved. This entire industry is defined by information, right? It's about what you know. It's about how you do it. It's information driven, but I am more and more convinced that it's about intention. Because once the business owner decides that they want to be sale ready, all of those small decisions that you talked about, do I need to replace a car? Every one of those decisions gets slightly changed, right? I view it a little differently than I was going to. And the interesting thing about it is, if you have that intention, the information comes, and then you make all of these little decisions a little differently and find yourself in a massively different place 2 years down the line. But again, how do you get to that place of intention? And that's again, a journey that I've walked, you've walked with people. It's a tough place to, it's tough to pay attention to something that's not burning, right?
How can you tell us a story of one of your clients you've helped this year?
Oh yeah, it's I think my favorite engagement actually occurred at the end of last year. It was a client I'd been working with for about 2 years, and during that time, made a number of changes with her business. She sold at the very end of last year, and we are connected on social media. And so while we've only, I think we got together once or twice over the course of the year, I've had more fun than I knew I would watching her social media over the course of this last year as she's gone from business owner to everything else, right? Now my life can be different. Now what do I want to do? And just watching how that's taken shape in the form of pictures on the beach with her kids, to a new business engagement that she's considering. It just that has been way more fun than I knew it could be. And again, it's not like I'm, talking with her every moment, but just watching the freedom that created for her has been a lot of fun.
The holiday chat calls that I do, the special one-on-ones. I just recorded one the other day, and it's going to be released in the next few days to people on the email list. But it's the caller's main concern is, he said, I want to buy a business, but I don't want to buy a job. And I said, the fact that you are speaking about that is 80% of the battle. Because it's for most small business people, when they get into that, they're daydreaming about the business is often they're thinking about the functions and, serving clients, and the guy who opens a pizzeria is thinking about spinning the dough with his hands,
Sure.
and they're not thinking about C-level decisions being made, in the back room where their office is. And so in the case of this particular client, how aware was she of the kinds of things that she should have been doing in her business? It sounds like she was very trapped in the day-to-day.
It was that was a big part of the journey that we took together the previous 2 years, going from a place where she had managers to a place where she had a management team, going to a place where she had an open door policy for dealing with employees, to a place where she didn't have an office in the office. It was those sorts of things where it created a very tangible difference for her, for her managers and for her employees, so that when this transition actually took place, it was not only not a surprise, I think, but also so much smoother than it could have been. But I'm interested, what do you tell that caller? What do you explain to them about, because I'm a firm believer that when you buy a business, especially if it's in an industry you don't know, you'd better be ready to dive into the deep end for a serious amount of time before so you can learn the business. How did you direct?
Well, the question was about how to eventually become an absent owner, or an owner who's away most of the time.
Sure.
And so what we ended up talking about is the difference between, I look at businesses that have a lot of locations that are not independently owned. So if you think about gas station chains, right? Exxon, hundreds of gas stations.
Yep.
Each one has a manager, but that's not where the skill set lies in running a chain of gas stations. It's the next level up. It's the regional manager who's looking at the reports from all the gas stations, because they are overseeing what the managers are doing. And so if you're going to own a business and not be there, that's the skill you need to have, is how can I look at some pretty summarized information and understand if things are being run properly in the business. And you ever watch that show Bar Rescue?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was one episode, what's his name? Taffer.
I don't recall.
Jim Taffer, I think. Jim Tafford. He was in Chicago, actually. And we have a live viewer from Chicago as well as from India. And Daniel just joined as well. This is kind of cool. So John Taffer was in a bar in Chicago, and he was doing his whole makeover thing where he was redecorating and changing things. And one of the issues with the bar is that the owner was an older lady, and she would come in at the busier times of the week to help, right? Help. And so basically she would get underfoot, and she would get, interrupt people and ask questions and stuff. And at the end of the makeover, when John Tafford and the manager were giving the playbook for the night, who's doing what, who's filling what role, she was like, so what do I do? And John turned to her and said, well, dear, owners actually can do their job from home.
Time for you to leave.
And he sent her home. Right. And that is so true. If everything is set up correctly, the owner's job is to meet with management and figure out, are we hitting our numbers? Are we achieving our, goals and all that kind of stuff?
Absolutely.
Just like over at the big companies, the president meets with the board and has to report to them. And eventually, if you can get things running that well, then you can retire without even selling the business.
Right. In fact, you did a video, I know, talking about why a manager-run business might not be as attractive to a potential buyer as you think it is. And speaking to that exact point, right? Because that concept that, yes, that's the role for the owner, but it's the informed owner. It's the one that can get the 5-minute call from the manager, get 3 key numbers and understand all of the implications of those numbers and direct because of that. And
because he was the manager for 30 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I can sniff something and know what it means instead of having to spend 3 hours diagnosing. And that's, you don't get that overnight.
No, you don't. And the place where I really saw this in action is I had a business buyer named Tony who bought 4 different businesses from me. And he had a job while he was buying businesses.
Is that right?
And he had been a VP at a major energy company. And the way that he was a vice president is he had many different department heads under him. And so how would he manage them? It's through this kind of very, very same thing. And this is where his skill set came from. Yeah. So every one of those departments had a weekly report, summarized activity report, so he could quickly see what was happening. And then whenever he bought a business, that was the first thing he implemented, was the same kind of summary report so that he could see what was going on. It was very cool. So for 2020, then your aim is going to be to increase the amount of content you create. You're going to do a regular show, or
no, not I got to tell you what, I've done enough of the podcast guesting over the course of the year, which I thoroughly enjoy, to know I never want to do what you do in terms of the hosting side. I just, the meat grinder that represents, the constant need to generate, my brain doesn't quite work that way. And so sometimes I find the stuff just flows out easy peasy. And then sometimes there's a 2-week lag where I'm like, what in the world am I going to talk about? And so the curation that I do on the site, your stuff, other stuff, again, the promise we look to make to our subscribers, to our viewers on the site, is we look for the best stuff on this topic that we can find on the web. I'm egotistical enough to think sometimes that's my stuff, but quite often it's other people's stuff. And so I can find good content and not have to create it. That's a win for the readers.
And of course, we're talking about exitoasis.com. That's the website, which if you have a business and you're planning on exiting, a great resource.
I appreciate that. David, tell me what you see 2020 being. I wanted to figure out a good way to ask you the question. And so here's my question to you. If somebody sends you a check for $1 million, David, based on your perception of what's happening in the economy and what 2020 is going to look like, what do you do with the money? Are you going to bury it in the backyard? Are you going to rush out and buy a business? Is it going to be in the market? What are you doing with the money?
Well, I certainly won't be buying any European sovereign bonds at negative interest rates.
It's such a different world we live in.
So there are several podcasts and things that I listen to that are related to what I do here, like my show and everything, but they're also just related to my own personal interest. And one of my personal bits of interest is economics and learning about markets and stuff like this. And so I listened to this one report McIlvaney Update. It's a weekly show from a guy in Colorado. And so he was talking about these negative interest rates, and he was at a conference in New York City where there was a speaker talking about the unmanaged investments. So there's all these new apps now on your phone, and they feature very low fees because there are no people working, right? And so a lot of investors, particularly millennials who are very comfortable with this technology, they're signing up for these app-based investing programs, and they'll put money into it and they'll simply buy indexes, right? And so, so what he was saying, because I still can't figure out who would buy a negative interest bond, right? So the indexes, so some company out there, some management company creates a global bond index, and it's just to track the overall performance of bonds. So if the government of a country like Germany is got a lot of bonds out there, then they're going to put that in the index, right? Because it's important to the nations of the world, and Germany issues a lot of bonds. So now Germany's bonds are in the index. And then if Germany decides we're going to issue a negative interest rate bond, well, guess what? That bond gets put in the index, and guess who ends up buying it? It's the people who are putting their money into an index fund, because there's no one making decisions.
Right.
And so the people who create the index are just including that negative interest rate bond, and now the computers are directing people's money into that bond simply because it's in the index.
Settling up at the end of the day, regardless of what the day brought. And
well, it was a big eye opener for me, because I was like, oh, right. So basically nobody's choosing to buy these things. Someone's figured out how to sell them. And that's a common theme that I keep running across in many different places, is that, you know, there are things out there that help people buy stuff, and there's things out there that help people sell stuff. And usually the money is made in selling of things, right? And so there's a lot of great technology gimmicks, et cetera, out there that are all based on helping people sell stuff. And it's not necessarily good for the person who ends up being the owner.
But David, you told the people what you wouldn't buy, but you didn't tell me what you were going to do with the million.
Well, you know, I guess I don't look that far into the future, because, you know, actually on Monday, a pre-authorized debit came out of my bank account, and I got to go fill in the last 3 boxes for my 2019 financial goals. So I hit them right at Christmas time.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But I'm more focused on, you know, how much I'm allowed to pay down on my mortgage and how much I want to set aside into my kids', you know, education plan. If I had $1 million, well, the first thing I'd do is max all those things out.
Check.
I don't know. I would probably have to consciously take a little break, because I think that because I don't deal with $1 million all the time, I would be worried that I would make improper decisions. I think a little vacation would probably be in order.
Do you find that I mean, you deal with a lot of prospective buyers. Do you deal mostly with helping them execute, or do you find your bias or personal opinion about what the next 10, 12, whatever months are going to bring? Does that influence the insight you provide?
Yeah, because I'll bring up questions that I don't think people ask themselves. So, you know, for example, if anyone brings up a business that's related to the healthcare industry in the United States, one of the questions I'll ask them is, I'll say, what way do you think the elections might go?
Right.
Because, you know, when we think about political risk, we usually think about developing countries. But I think with respect to healthcare, there's political risk in the United States, because you have a big faction of the political conversation about making drastic changes to that, right? And I don't know, it could make opportunities for entrepreneurs. It could close off opportunities for entrepreneurs. But when people are looking at buying a business to support their family and achieve their financial goals, one of the things that they are looking for is a stable cash flow.
Right.
And the stuff that could, you know, triple next week. I mean, that's the Silicon Valley stuff, right? I mean, that is the speculative stuff that most people who are taking their savings and borrowing against their home and from the local bank, they don't want to get into something that's speculative.
That's right. Yeah.
So I hope that answers your question.
Well, no, it feels like when I look at next year, I feel like I have a fair amount of stability for 10 months, and then who knows, right? Who knows what happens after that? It seems like the election we're facing represents an opportunity for anything on the spectrum to occur and be perfectly justified, and have everyone look and say, well, why didn't you expect this to happen? Didn't you know that it's a, I will say that when I look at 2020 and beyond, I have to feel like small business owners that have been thinking about selling but not engaged the topic, have not moved forward, have not listed that business if they're in their late 50s, mid 60s. I think we're going to look back on this last couple of years as a golden age of selling a business that might be pretty unique historically. Easy money. It's really cool to be an entrepreneur right now, right? I wonder how many are going to end up regretting that they've waited.
Well, I lived through the last one in my brokerage. And the last downturn was basically 08, 09-ish, right?
Yep.
And I was in I started working in the brokerage in 08, became the owner in 09, and got out of it in 11. And so in that period.
What a lousy time to take that challenge on, wasn't it?
No, it was a good time, and
interesting.
I think, this is why I don't necessarily. I think that you're right. I think that if things turn down, and we've had 10 years of growth on paper, the numbers that are publicized has been 10 years of growth, and everything is purported to be good. There are people out there who have alternative ways to calculate inflation who say it hasn't been so great, but it just typically doesn't go for longer than that.
No, we're already well beyond the time it typically goes.
Right. So we're due for this downturn, and so the sellers may regret that they didn't sell when all their numbers look great and they had year-over-year growth and record profits. And so, I think if you're a seller and you miss out on this, you may be a little bit regretful, but some of them will simply wait. And maybe the IBBA report that I looked at a couple of weeks ago, there was a comment in there which talked about if sellers don't act now, they may have to hang on for 4 or 5 years. That's what I saw back in those years. Yep. I had to tell people their business was worth less than they thought. And they said, well, I'm just going to wait for sales to recover. So the market contracts, because the availability of businesses will decline as some of these sellers simply won't move forward if they don't have to. And as far as the buyers go, it can create opportunities for more creative deals that would not normally be accepted in the market. When sellers are out there that have a business that a lot of people could operate, and they know that people can get 90% financing at the SBA, they tend to want that deal.
Right.
They say, I'll just wait for the guy who can qualify at the bank. When the bank changes the rules and all of a sudden the money isn't as easily flowing, then you have to be more creative. And that's what I took out of that period of time. I mean, there was 1 year, I think I did 9 deals with no business financing.
Interesting.
So some people refinanced their homes. They used personal credit, to get their down payment together, but it was just their money and the seller holding a note. And so showing the seller why they should take those deals and why it made sense, and encouraging the buyers to make the offers when a lot of them felt shy about making that offer. I learned the kinds of deals that really do get done. Yeah. And they're still getting done. I was doing research for a client on plant nurseries recently, and it was in one of the northern states, so very seasonal business. And there's a database of SBA deal data that is available out there. And then there's the other databases that you probably used when you were at Sunbelt, which are broker-generated data.
Sure.
In the broker-generated data, I found 3 transactions in the last 2 years that were 50% seller financed. which you won't find if you look in the SBA deal database, because it's only deals that were done under SBA, loan programs, right?
Sure.
And if you look at the financial press and you look at the small business press, nobody's talking about all the businesses being sold with 50% seller financing, but there they were, 3 of them, right? So the deals do get done. I see it with the Business Buyer Adventure Group program, because I encourage people to make these offers, and sellers who say, I'll never do that, are countering with some degree of seller finance. So they will do it if they believe it's the right person. And so it really comes down to relationship a lot of the time.
It does. And I think you make an excellent point that really, regardless of what the macro data is, this always comes down to a personal decision. It always comes down to a set of personal circumstances and variables that impact why I make the decision. And yes, I might regret that I get X instead of Y for my value, but that I guess for me that.
Well, here's the other thing, and don't forget this: the multiples on small businesses are quite low. So a seller today who did not sell and didn't get top dollar still owned the business through some very profitable times.
True.
And so a lot of what they would have realized in a successful sale, they've gotten it anyway by being the owner.
I think that's an interesting perspective. What I challenge my clients to look at is not just viewing this as the peak of the mountain, right? The sale shouldn't necessarily just be, reaching the top of Everest, because there's plateaus along the way, and there's so many I started with the story of the client who sold and now is finding these opportunities developing and coming available. And when somebody tells me, why would I sell now? Things are going good. That's the reality that comes to mind for me, I think. Is that really what it's about? Are we really waiting until the business is so painful? Because I'm sure you've seen people try to sell in those scenarios, and we both know how difficult that is.
Well, it's funny. And again, anyone who's watching this video, if you haven't signed up to the email list, you should, because one of the holiday chat calls that I recorded is from a fellow who bought a business 2 years ago. He worked in it for 12 years. So he worked in the business for 10 years. The owner of the business got the business evaluated for a really high price. Okay. So he went to someone who gave him a little bit of a bad advice. Hey, Henry, how you doing?
Hello.
And so then they went to market. They were trying to sell it for years, and they couldn't get anyone to bite at that price. And they started to reduce their asking price while the foot came off the gas pedal, and sales started to curve down and profitability started to curve down, and the thing started to deteriorate. And eventually this guy, who was an employee in the firm, bought it for, he didn't say the exact price, but he said far, far less than the original asking price.
Sure.
And so it was an inside detailed story. And that's in one of the holiday chat recordings of observing this. And then the guy took advantage of the situation. He ended up becoming the owner. And then there were partners. One of the sellers became an employee of his. So
interesting.
He's in the
I look forward to seeing it. Hello, Henry.
How you doing?
Hey, Mike. How are you? Doing well. Thanks.
How are things? So in Texas, you guys don't have any aspiration for snow. So what is Christmas decorating like in Texas?
Well, it varies. This year it will be warm. Tomorrow's supposed to be a picture perfect day, 71 high. But in my 30 years in Texas, we did have one white Christmas, and that was about 15 years ago. Yeah.
And do people get like spruce or fir Christmas trees? Is that a thing that people do there?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. There's live Christmas trees often. We've gone to an artificial one because we got tired of paying $150 for a tree that died 2 weeks later.
What?
So, yeah.
100, I guess.
Well, to get a decent size one, it's in that price range, even at like Home Depot. And I think it was the last year we did it, my wife, because you can return them, but imagine that, right? Taking everything off and returning it, you're not going to do it. So we just got tired of that and got an artificial one.
Because about 4 or 5 weeks ago, if you were to drive on the highway around here, you would see truck after truck after truck of these Christmas trees all tightly bundled, stacked up. heading for those places. But
sure, even when growing up living in Miami, we used to get a real tree sometimes. Then my sister had an allergy for it, so there went the real Christmas tree. But yeah, even in South Florida, people do live, now dead Christmas trees.
When we bought our home years ago, it's a small farm. We have 50 acres, and the previous owner had just planted 20 acres of Christmas trees a few years before. And I don't remember how many thousands of trees. And we were actually at the closing for the home, and he asked, "Well, are you planning to sell the Christmas trees?" And I said, "Yeah, I think we could do that." And he said, "Well, do you want to pay me to trim them this year?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, you have to go out and trim every tree every year.
You have to groom them." Yeah,
exactly. And then I told him I didn't think we were going to be selling them as Christmas trees, and we've just watched them grow and spread since we bought the place. But,
interesting. And I only say that because, believe it or not, there are tree farms, and I don't know what type of pine tree it is, but there are Christmas tree farms in Texas.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
That's for no other reason that we need to prove that we have everything in Texas. But there is such a thing.
Oh, that's too funny.
Henry, Mike and I have been talking about buying and selling businesses, and you have some big news from 2019 about a business that you sold. Why don't you tell everyone about that?
That's right. Myself and my partner, David Begin, which Mike knows. Mike's been on both my show and on David's The How of Car Washing show. So we sold the 3 car washes. Now, that was primarily David Begin's business. He had the initial 2 locations for, I believe, 12 years, highly successful. I mean, top percentile performance units. And then I had been kind of a de facto partner of his for years. And then we finally invested together in what was his 3rd location. So we had that one open for just a year. And then it was just one of those things, an offer we couldn't refuse anyway.
So this ties into what Mike and I were just talking about, because I listened to the podcast you did, and for anyone listening, it's The How of Business is the name of the podcast. And I'm sure you're on all the platforms that people would use.
That's right.
The where you described, because the buyer of the car washes was a private equity firm.
Correct.
Right.
That's
and so
right.
Mike, this gets back into your point about, things go really well. There's a lot of money out there. There's a lot of liquidity. And what has been happening because of the publicly traded companies, the rates of return are going so low. Mm-hmm. People are jamming money downward to the smaller and smaller businesses. And Henry here has been one of the beneficiaries.
Yeah. And we were in an industry that is highly fragmented even still. There is no national chain of car washes, for example. And so there's a tremendous opportunity there. There are approximately, the count, anybody will tell you, about 25,000 what we call tunnels in just the United States. The largest chain has about 300 units. So that tells you, and there's only 1 or 2, maybe 3 big boys in that number of unit range. And then it's individual owners like myself and David Begin. So there's a tremendous opportunity for consolidation, economies of scale, and building at least a regional brand. And so that's what a lot of these people are looking to do.
So, I mean, around here, car washes often go on the same property as gas station, convenience store type businesses. So I'm surprised that one of those sort of big fuel names or would one of them be one of these big players?
They're not, because of course their layout, the type of car wash that they have is, like you said, in combination with their gas station or convenience store. And the ones that we've built, that what's mostly been built as far as standalone is what's called an exterior express, which is that you as the customer pay at a pay station. It might be automated. There might be a person there. You stay in your car. It washes the exterior, hence the term exterior express.
Just the machine moves around you.
Well, no, actually, in ours, it's a tunnel, which gives you the proper efficiency of the right equipment and a good quality wash. And then when it spits you out the end, you optionally can vacuum for free, mostly is the model now.
Okay.
So that model is what's been built up in the last 15 years and really has expanded the market. It used to be you either had to choose from that quick wash at the gas station where it came over you and the quality there was poor at best, but you kind of had to get the stuff off your car. That's why you did it. And it was relatively cheap because you got a discount when you filled up. Or it was the full serve where you're paying a lot more money. Those still exist and they serve a need in the market still. Or the self-serve where you get out and you had the wand and you did it yourself, and nobody wants to do that really. So this exterior express model came about to serve the needs of somebody who wants, it's still an impulse buy mostly. It's quick, the line moves fast. I can vacuum myself if I want to, and I still get a pretty darn good wash for anywhere from a starting point of $7 to $10 in that range. Yeah.
So,
but as to your question, no, it doesn't tie into what a gas station is looking for, because on our land, for example, there's no room to add a gas station. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then, so just a curious question. Obviously, when you and David built the car wash, you were able to operate it and get a certain rate of return out of your investment. How well is the new owner going to do?
It's a good question. For the multiples that they're paying, they're looking at this, as you alluded to, David, with a different investment model that's above my pay grade, right? They're breaking it out. They're holding the equipment separately. They're refinancing this. They're putting the real estate in a different. So they're looking at it in a different way than an individual investor would. And they have a different exit strategy as well, which might include going public or selling out the portfolio at some point that has scale.
Yeah.
So the way that they look at the
numbers, multipliers change.
Exactly. It's a whole different model than what I'm certainly used to looking at as an independent business owner.
Well, congratulations.
Thanks.
That's big, great, awesome news.
Yeah, it was an interesting thing, and we talk about it in that episode. The emotions behind it were the bigger challenge than the numbers, right? From a financial perspective, it made a lot of sense, but the emotions behind it were, I think, more difficult to get through.
So, even for you, because you weren't there all the time?
Yeah, because for me, in part, it was different than David's emotions. For me, it was, it was a 2-year development process to open that third wash. And I acted as the project manager on it. So from the day that we put an LOI on the piece of land to the day we opened was just over 2 years. And then 1 year of operations. So I felt like I still hadn't gotten the return on that sweat investment. Now, when we sold, of course, I got a return. It was positive, but I felt like, boy, I needed this thing to breathe for a while to make some money and generate some cash flow to reward me for that investment I had made, right?
Well, Mike, you flipped a couple car washes, didn't you?
I had, yep.
Yeah. And so how long was the period that you ended up owning them between buying and selling?
The one was 4.5 years. The other was 3.5 years. I was operating, I was pursuing both on a 5-year exit. But both happened a little bit quicker than I had planned. So because I remember you had done an article recently talking about how you actually just put something on Craigslist and you found your buyer. It was a weird one. Yeah.
And Henry, had you and David actually gone through the process of putting your businesses up for sale, or were you approached by these guys?
We were approached, and this was the second one. We went through a first opportunity that died, and so that was an investment, emotional as well as of time, and it fell apart pretty deep into the process. So in both cases, David was approached.
Yeah. Okay.
And by more than two. So we were fortunate in that regard. We're in a market, the car wash market is one where if you've got a decent location and operation, you're going to be called on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've heard this from people in different industries that, in some industries, people are telling me they're getting mail and phone calls from family offices and PE companies and all this kind of stuff. And then, and in some industries, it's crickets.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got one of the guys who's in my adventure group coaching program is up in Saskatchewan. And in his, he did a letter writing campaign and got like a 7% rate of people calling him back, like out of the
Interesting.
letters he issued. And that was one of the, like, people had never heard of anyone going knocking on doors before in that business.
He was offering to sell his business or looking?
No,
for
he
a
was trying to
business?
buy. He was trying to
Trying to
locate
buy.
businesses where people wanted to sell.
I see.
And so it was
Interesting.
just a letter saying, I'm looking for a business in your industry. And if you thought about selling, give me a call.
So is that 7%? Is that good or bad?
Direct response marketing, 2%
Yeah.
is good.
Exactly. So that sounds pretty darn good that he got a
Yeah.
7%.
And it was because there's very little activity like that.
I see.
Patricia, I saw that comment. We'll have none of that in here.
I didn't see the comment, but it must have been good.
Well, we're on a 20-second delay, so it'll take a little minute before she hears the chastising.
Yeah. But speaking of the broker, my previous business that I sold, which has been now about 5 years, I did go through a broker for that one.
Oh, yes. And that was the Sweet Salon business?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So, and the other big news for you for 2020 is you've now gone and invested in something new.
Correct. Yeah. I've invested with my cousin. I was his business coach in him finding a new business, vetted a few opportunities. And it's interesting because for me, when I started that process with him now over a year ago, I don't lean towards franchises because I feel like, I'm really critical of what can I get out of it since I've got experience. But this franchise really impressed us. It's called Office Evolutions, and it's a co-working. There's a lot of different titles for what they do, but think of WeWorks, but we're not going after necessarily the millennial crowd or the high tech or the startups. We're looking to be, and we will be in a more suburban setting, serving the traditional 1 to 5 person business. Like we're already doing pre-leasing, and I think we've got like 4 attorneys, so that that's a perfect fit. So we'll offer everything from I just need a business address and I'll pay a monthly membership to that, through a private suite that I'm going to lease for a year and everything in between, including a membership that would give you just access to our shared space, our co-working space.
Yeah. There's a coffee shop and a co-working space actually near me. And, I do a lot of writing for the content that I put out.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when I'm here in my home office all day, every day, I sometimes feel lonely. And so I'll just go because I want to work with other people around me.
That's a big part of it. Yeah.
Not necessarily for interaction, but just to have that buzz around you a little bit,
Yeah. And that's what people are saying. It's interesting for me. I've homed office now for 20 years and I love it, but I'm the rarity. But even I have seen that I got to get out there more, but most people who even home office, and because that's becoming a more popular model at all levels, whether it's your own business or working for a corporation, people miss that social interaction or just being around other humans. And a lot of times a coffee shop isn't quite conducive, right? Or a place to meet your clients or those kinds of things. So it's tricky because there's so many people going into this space, right? So you have to be very careful about location that gives you a little bit of protection against or some kind of barrier to entry to others. And WeWork has really, to some extent, hurt it because they expanded so rapidly and they have these huge spaces that are sitting there empty. Well, fortunately, they've mostly gone into urban settings and we're looking for more suburban settings.
I think there's more to the WeWork story though and I think the story is starting to unfold because I think that, the wasn't the president or the CEO also buying buildings and then
it's a mess and he's been ousted.
There's an element of sort of personal engineering for his own benefit that's gone into there that isn't necessarily managers working for the benefit of shareholders all the time. That's been going on there.
No, and all that got exposed as they began filing for their IPO, which never happened. And he's been ousted since, but nonetheless, he's impacted the market because, they've come into areas and they're taking over an entire building, in Manhattan, they've got entire buildings that are sitting there empty. So it'll be interesting. So that does impact negatively the space, but nonetheless, I am bullish about it. I'm excited about it. And so we will hopefully open our first location in March of 2020.
Okay. And that's along the coast, sort of north of Fort Lauderdale?
It's inland from Fort Lauderdale. That's right. A suburb called Plantation, which is about 20 minutes from downtown Fort Lauderdale inland.
Okay.
Yeah.
And anyone who mentions your name gets free coffee?
Absolutely. Free coffee, free donuts.
Right. Well, Mike, before you go, and since Henry, we got you on the line here, I have another question about franchises that was submitted by one of my readers who got my email the other day about today's special event. And it's an interesting question because he's asking, the dry cleaning industry is facing this decline. And it's funny because I went looking for data on that, and I found an article from a website called Racks, which was like an industry publication, which has since gone out of business. But so the industry publication has closed down online.
Yeah, it's never a good sign.
and their archive just happens to be still active, and they're talking about casual day at work, fast fashion. So there are ladies now who are buying dresses for $40-$50, and I think would rightfully hesitate to spend $12 or $15 to have them cleaned, right? And so all these things are moving against dry cleaning.
Right.
But the question is, why is Procter & Gamble spinning up a new franchise in the Midwest, Tide Dry Cleaners?
Interesting.
And they're trying to leverage the Tide brand name. And I thought I went and looked at the website, and that big round Tide logo is featured prominently on these locations. Mm-hmm. And when I go down into the become a franchisee section, there's all kinds of information. They're obviously trying to recruit.
Interesting.
And, what do you think of that?
It's a couple of data points to add to that before I try to answer the question from my perspective. But another thing that's factoring in that just dawned on me is my daughter, she did her internship in New York City this past summer, and she took advantage of a place called Rent the Runway. And so for a membership, she got to rent outfits, and she doesn't have to clean them before she returns them. So therein again, she was wearing, all kinds of fashion items that she didn't have to worry about getting dry cleaned. They just return them dirty, and then I'm sure they've got a facility or a contract with somebody. Yeah. But the other thing is I've seen an emergence, and this was one of the businesses with my cousin, as I alluded to, we were looking at, was the coin-operated laundromats. Right. I'm starting to see those, and there is one franchise out of Florida. They're just in their infancy. I'm starting to see those pop up in neighborhoods that you would have never thought you would have seen a coin-operated laundry place. In my suburban city where I live, which is mostly, middle class and above, we have one, and it's doing well. So I don't know. It's interesting. I got to think that part of it must be a branding effort on the part of Tide, perhaps, to position themselves as the go-to for anything related to cleaning. Maybe it has something to do with that.
I was actually kicking the tires on an opportunity here a couple of years back, where I had located 2 or 3 dry cleaners that were for sale within a distance where I looked at maybe being able to, combine, and each of them happened to be and were sold as the only dry cleaner in town.
Interesting.
The problem is that there was a hidden competitive market there, because yes, they were the only dry cleaners in town, but there were, turns out, 3 grocery stores that had pickup and drop off for dry cleaners that they had. So, I mean, there was a hidden competitive marketplace there that didn't bring with it the chemical question and the hazardous material question. And okay, I'm going to buy this site that's been a dry cleaner for 25 years. What's in the dirt, right? I mean, those are huge issues in that industry in terms of the history that comes with it, and the fact that the small grocery store just sent them out in a truck and brought them back 2 days later. Huge impact.
Well, I think that, Henry, what you said about the car washes, I think also could be said about the cleaning business.
Absolutely.
A lot of mom
There's
and
an
pops,
opportunity there. Yeah.
Right. So a brand like Tide could certainly, bring recognition. Like McDonald's does. If you're in a strange town, you see McDonald's, you already know what the food's going to taste like.
That's right.
But my first instinct when I saw the building with that big Tide logo was coin-op laundry as well. And it doesn't appear to be there, but I know a little bit about coin-op laundries because I sold one, and I did research into opening one myself at one point.
Okay.
And the business really is in the wash and fold and in the ability to better serve certain households. So when I was younger, I lived in an apartment building, and we had one washer and one dryer for like 5 units, right? And so if you want to do your laundry on Saturday morning, you're probably going to have to wait. And then you'd have to run up and downstairs and, move one load at a time. And your neighbors would be trying to jockey their stuff in too. Whereas if I went to the Coin laundromat, I could do 4 loads of laundry at one time.
Right. Knock it out. Yeah.
By using 4 machines. And then I could go and put them in 3 or 4 dryers, and I'd be in and out. And I would actually drive across the street and wash my car while the clothes were in the machine. And so I also know that in a nice suburban neighborhood where almost everyone already owns their own washer and dryer, there's still a big demand for the big machines for quilts and sleeping bags. And,
that's right.
Comforters
and whatever.
Here it's hockey gear, because no woman in Canada wants her husband or son to be putting hockey gear in her machines.
And here it's probably hunting gear, but yeah,
right. So there's a demand for those odd size and bigger pieces, bigger machines. I think it's interesting though, because when you own a franchise, like Procter & Gamble is getting into this, and I looked to see if it wasn't somebody else who just licensed the name.
Yeah.
Everything I found on there led back to Procter & Gamble itself. Their business is not dry cleaning. Their business is what?
Consumer products, right? And serving that market.
No, but I mean, in this franchise thing, their business is selling franchises.
Okay, I see.
Right.
I thought you were going to say they want to sell their chemicals and their products through that system as well.
Well, they want to do that too, but I think that a brand like Tide is going to convince a lot of people to put down the money to open one of these franchises, believing that the strength of the brand is going to be what all they need to be successful.
Agreed. Now, going back to the coin operator, which will be interesting to see if Tide is doing this, what I found in my research is that the equipment manufacturers offer financing. So I thought, wow, how compelling is that your biggest capital outlay for one of these, you're going to get financing from the manufacturer. And yeah, you might pay a little bit of a premium, but boy, I'll take that any day, right? If my major capital outlay is I can spread out over a number of years, and that's the equipment. There's very few businesses where that's an opportunity, right?
Well, and like I said, wash and fold, the demographics are in your favor.
Absolutely.
Because when
convenience, right there, that's a convenience buy there. Yeah.
Well, but your aging boomers,
a
lot of them are going to want to. Someone just commented that P&G actually has a wait list for new franchisees for this brand. But I know that when I was a young man in my 20s, I was really missing my mom and her services. So I used to just drop off my dirty laundry at a wash and fold place, and they would use the coin op machines during business hours when they typically weren't busy.
Brilliant.
And they would wash and fold. So they were getting more utility out of those machines. And people like elderly people who don't want to do the chore. And in fact, when I was, I volunteered at a private career college 2 weeks ago now, one of the students was proposing a business like this in a more rural locality that had no coin op service at all. And people either had to drive into the city or impose upon relatives to do laundry. I've seen coin op do really well too as an extension of an existing business.
Yeah.
Sort of your gas station convenience store with
interesting
laundry, right? In that case, you don't necessarily need an additional employee.
Right.
The clerk can keep their eye on what's going on in there.
The second wash that I owned and subsequently sold, car wash, had a coin laundry operation with it. It was a larger service facility, and everything that we've been talking about is true. And then there's the question of the math of profitability, because to your point, part of the reason you get that equipment financed by the manufacturers because it's really expensive.
Sure.
And you've got to do an awful lot of laundry to start seeing a return. I've seen a lot of those facilities that get built by some other professional, the doctor, the lawyer, airplane pilot. They're looking to, and again, if you look in the material there, what you're going to see is that these places get built for $1 million. They get sold 2 years later for $750.
Mm-hmm.
They get sold 3 years after that for about $300, and that's the guy or gal that actually has an opportunity to make some money on it.
Yeah. And you're touching on something that we see so much. Everybody wants the no, I don't have to be there full time. What's the term for that? But the passive owner, everybody's looking for that magical business that doesn't require me to be there that much.
Absolutely. And I'll leave you guys on this note. You talked about the car washes earlier, and I just want to point out it's a very different endeavor to own a car wash in Texas than it is to own a car wash in central Wisconsin. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to try to thaw out a bill acceptor with a hair dryer when it's 30 below. Not an experience that I need to replicate again.
No, I can imagine.
Okay, so I don't know if you do this in Wisconsin, Mike, but the self-serve car washes where you use the wand and the brush and you clean your own car.
Yeah. Yep.
Here, you have to extend the foundation out into the parking lot, and it's called an apron, and you have to heat it.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's
we had to do that
what we
at
had.
the exit of our wash as well. We had to do that. Otherwise, cars would slip off.
Absolutely. That doesn't mean that the hill coming out of the exit doesn't turn into an ice skating rink. And it's amazing what can freeze when you've got a water-based business.
Well, and when you're in a cold climate, when now you're talking about energy consumption to heat outdoors, right? And there's some car washes around here that will simply close for a couple months in the winter. But that's when the salt's being applied to the road.
Yeah, our busy season was the winter. Now, the Front Range, as they call it, where we were in Colorado Springs and Denver, you would think it wouldn't be, but it's a prime location weather-wise because, to your point, what's fortunate there is we don't get these freezes that last months. We get a storm that comes through, 1 or 2 days of snow, and then the next day it's sunny and people want to get that stuff off their car. So the winter was our busy season.
Yeah, absolutely. Same true.
Cool. Well, thank
gentlemen,
you, Mike,
it's been such a pleasure. I'll let you continue your conversation. Thank you again for the invite, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays to both of you.
Thanks, Mike.
You too. Merry Christmas. So Henry, you talked about your business sale. What else has been going on? You have a regular weekly podcast.
I do.
And what changes have you seen over the course of the past year?
And there's Mark. As far as the podcast goes,
yeah.
One of the things I'm starting to see and worry about, the big challenge we have as podcasters is discovery, people finding us. Now, I'm fortunate that I'm at a point now where the word of mouth kicks in and then I've got pretty good traction. But I'm worried about, David, that when I look at, I'm fortunate if I go now, iTunes redid how they group things and they've got the entrepreneur category, which I'm in, and they've also got to the bottom right, the top shows. And I'm fortunate in business, in the business subcategory and top business shows, I'm usually in the top 200, which is what they rank there. So that's great for me. And entrepreneurship, I'm usually on, that's a smaller list. I think it's the top 100 shows. But if I look to the top of that list, more and more what we tend to recall procasters, right? So the latest NPR show or the latest whatever highly produced celebrity show, that's pushing us farther down on that list. And I just worry that it's going to become all about professionally produced shows. So that's one thing that I'm seeing that I've noticed this past year.
Well, that's interesting. Mark, for those of you in the audience who don't know Mark is a coach that helps coaches with their coaching businesses.
He's my coach now.
Is that correct, Mark?
It's a lot of use of the word coach in 1 or 2 sentences, but yes, for lack of a better term, yes.
And you have been podcasting a lot longer than I have. I mean, you started
more than I have, yeah.
You started with a daily show. What year was it, Mark?
It was November 17th of 2014. So we just passed the 5-year mark recently. Yeah.
Right. And so what do you say about that? About Henry's concern about the more professionally produced stuff? They'd have better Christmas decorations than mine. That's for sure.
Yeah, that is pretty. I just noticed that. That is sad, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me on, guys. I was going to pop in like one of the Ghost of Christmas Past or Future or whatever. We'll do a whole Scrooge theme. I know exactly what Henry's talking about, because even if you compare looking at the cover art's a good example. Like back in the day in 2014, it looked like a 3-year-old did all the cover arts, and if they even had cover art at all. And this was some of the top shows. They were bad. Now it's very professional, it's very slick and all that. That being said, I think because it's available to everybody, it's a very democratic platform. It's not like a TV. You have to own a TV studio to put a show on or something like that. So I think there is still going to be room for the quote normal people, but I definitely noticed a lot more professional outlets and characters getting on there with their shows. And I think overall that's great though, because it's bringing podcasting out to the masses more than it was before.
Yeah, agreed. Well, it validates the platform more, right?
Yeah. And when you can start to buy a car and the stereo system in the car is geared towards people downloading, listening to podcasts, it widens the market. I know that I still meet people who say, "Oh, I heard you had a podcast. How do I listen to that?"
Yeah. Does it cost money? How do I do that?
Yeah. So there's still a penetration thing going on with where new people are coming to the market. But I'll tell you secretly why, and it's a secret, because the only people that are going to hear this are the people that are watching and the people that watch the recording. And to your point, Henry, it's a very small group of people. It's probably only going to be a few hundred, maybe 1,000, or maybe a little bit more. If everyone was watching the stuff that we produce, then the opportunities for our listeners would be diminished, because the ideas that we disseminate and the sort of things we reveal, I think, are real valid information, and people who take the time to go looking for it are going to benefit from it. You know, Mike Finger just left, but he and I did an analysis of the most popular YouTube video about selling a business, where a guy was jumping around like full of energy, talking crazy talk about how you're going to start a business and sell it for $100 million. And we were watching it, and I was like, if this is the sort of content that the average person is going to watch, then that's great, because the masses of people need to be distracted by something. It's not real stuff.
But is your point that as long as you continue to produce quality and put that out there, there's a hunger for that?
Yeah, and the people who want it are going to seek it out. I remember 20 years ago, I was interested in the secondary real estate note market. So, and like, what are they called? Tax claim certificates and things. And they do this in Texas, and there's a lot of secondary private property notes in Texas.
Right.
And I remember having to subscribe to newsletters that would come in the mail and find books that were written that people spoke highly about. And when I bought the thing for $90 and it was shipped here, it was obvious it was printed at Kinko's, right? And so I realized I'm accessing a very tiny, part of the information world by getting, and that stuff now is on the internet, but still there's not a lot of people looking there, because not a lot of people are interested. And so if you're really niched down in your content, I don't think you're ever going to have a huge audience, but I think the audience you're going to attract are going to be the right people.
Yeah, that's what you hope for, right?
What's
people that you can impact.
There's that 1,000 true fans that's out there. Kevin Kelly talks about. So it applies to business, but also if you're in music, if you're an artist, a writer, anything like that, if you have 1,000 true fans, I'd argue it's even probably less, a couple hundred true fans buying all your stuff, you can have a really successful business. So like you said, Dave, you don't have to go wide. You can go very narrow and deep. Sounds dirty, but we're talking about penetrating markets and stuff. Man.
Thanks for making it that way, Mark.
I haven't hit the eggnog yet, I promise.
My children are 10 and 12, and they watch YouTube videos as much as they watch Netflix, and in their entire life at my home anyway, they've never had cable.
Yeah.
So
it's interesting.
When they see the Dan TDM, he plays Minecraft on videos, and he just hit 12 million subscribers. And they asked me when I'm getting my YouTube play button plaque. And so I went and looked it up, and apparently you need 100,000 subscribers to get
do
this.
You smack him at
plaque.
that point for even insinuating that?
Well, I literally this week, because I've been promoting, this event, I just crossed 9,000. Do you know what you get? You know what you get at 10,000, Henry and Mark?
I don't know. There's probably a little star next to your name or something.
A jiggling GIF.
I love that.
They email you a jiggling GIF that has YouTube 10K.
They email it to you. Love that.
So I can't wait, because I'm going to put it on my blog. I'm going to download the GIF and put it on my blog. But, the audience, I don't think my audience will ever be that big. And it doesn't need to be, because I get emails all the time from people who say, I've been watching your videos and it helped me avoid this dumb deal I was going to do. Or it helped me realize that this other thing was not a good move. And that just makes me, that enriches my soul. That's what I want.
That's what it's about. Yeah.
Do you guys want to start a channel where we'll do unboxings for little, I don't know, Kinder surprises or toys or something?
We need
that or twerking videos. I don't know, either or, but we'll go with unboxing. Yeah.
I'll tell you, I was crossing my fingers hoping a certain box was going to arrive by today, because I wanted to do an unboxing. I bought myself a Mike Winnett 11X mug.
I don't know what that is.
You guys, do you know what that is, Mark?
I do, because you turned me on to the video. I watched his Contrepreneur video. Excellent.
Henry, it's this guy in the UK, and he's basically making videos where he reveals the formulaic methodology that these online get-rich-quick kind of artists are using to lure people in and sell big-ticket programs that, for the most part, most people don't really have an opportunity to successly execute.
Right. What's his name again?
Mike Winnett. It's like winner, but it's a T instead of an R at the end.
Got it.
And he, his stuff that he's putting out has really exploded on YouTube, and the comments are incredible. People saying that they spent thousands of dollars on get rich with real estate things, and get rich with day trading, and get rich with cryptocurrencies and all that kind of stuff. And what's interesting is Mark and I live in the same town,
right,
and about 2 hours away from here was the home base of I pulled up the article because I thought I might want to talk about it today. Quadra CX. Quadra CX was a crypto trading platform. Okay. And so people put millions of dollars into this thing, and it was being run from a guy's house just outside Halifax, Nova Scotia. And he was in India on vacation when he died. And the coin wallets that contained the Bitcoin, only he knew the password to.
Oh my goodness.
So tens of millions of dollars of people's money in the exchange were basically locked up because of the password problem. His heirs became de facto directors of the company, went to bankruptcy court to get a trustee put on to try and find money to satisfy all the account holders. Well, all the big financial players and all the big criminal guys in Canada are all up in Toronto. So they all flew down, went to the court in Halifax and asked for the case to be moved to Toronto, and the court agreed. Okay. So that's fine. That happened months ago. Last week, they all had to fly back to Halifax because all of these people that are dealing with the windup of this exchange, they've asked the court to exhume the guy's body.
Oh my!
And you can guess why.
To see if he had it on him, tattooed on him. Why?
Or see if he faked his death too.
They want to make sure it's really him. So it could turn out that the whole thing is a giant scam. And what we were just saying as Mark entered the conversation about the coin laundry and about the people saying, I want to get into something where I can earn money without having to do anything.
Right.
It's the same sort of sales pitch that's being done with, the people getting into all these get rich quick schemes.
But to be honest, it's always been a lure that humans are attracted to, right? I mean, from the initial Ponzi schemes back in the 1920s, I think is when Mr. Ponzi did his thing. We've always had that inclination for get rich quick or some kind of quick fix.
Yeah.
But as Mike Finger was pointing out, what you see a lot of times is people who want to keep their day job or other career and then do something on the side. And I think those are the people that are more susceptible to that. Yeah.
Well, and I think there are, sort of side hustles that people can do. I mean,
Absolutely.
my business that I have today started as a little side hustle.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, you probably have a lot of people that you work with who have some kind of day job or other thing that want to get into the coaching business, right?
Yeah, well, my coaching business, I had as you know, Dave, from us being friends, I had a sales gig with a telecommunications company here in Canada. Now, luckily, it was based from home, super flexible. I could get my stuff done in about 2 hours for that, and then work on my coaching. But that provided an important runway in the early days till coaching got rolling with it. So I've often said that as long as you have, say, 20 hours a week that you can really give to the business and be actually doing it, not playing Candy Crush or Farmville or anything like that. I know people can get more done in 20 hours a week than people who are, quote, working 80 hours a week. They're not working. They're fighting about politics on Facebook and doing lots of other stuff. They're not working for a full 80 hours a week.
What is Candy Crush one of the biggest challenges to having a successful coaching business?
I don't know, because I don't know if it's as big anymore. I think impeachments cost entrepreneurs probably a couple $100 million in the last week or so. I'm thinking if you put as much time, energy, and passion into your business as talking about impeachment, then all these people, you'd be rolling, right?
Well, it's easy for you guys to say because you guys are in the sidelines of all this and
well, no, that's a lot of
afar.
Yeah, there's a lot of Canadians that are wasting their time on it too, on both sides. Yeah. But probably won't get all political, Dave, on you. I promise. I have certain feelings about impeachment, but a lot of Canadians are diving into it. I'm thinking it's not even your country. Maybe you should work on your business. So that being said, I have a vested interest, as I'm sure Dave, you do too, with a lot of clients in the States. I want your economy to continue to roll like it is rolling, and I'm hoping for a certain result in 2020, but that's all.
To bring it back to business, I think what happens is we naturally look for distractions, especially when it gets hard, right?
Yeah.
So
you can be busy.
Exactly. We've all seen this in our coaching business. I've only recently started my formal coaching business, but I've been volunteering with SCORE for over 5 years. And there I'll see a lot of people that'll come for one visit. And then, as I say, when it gets hard, they disappear, right? And so I think that we naturally look for, just wasting some time on some YouTube videos is a lot easier than doing the work that I know I need to do. And so I think that's where the exposure is.
Yeah. I said something to a client today because I'm really big on the consistent content creation and putting it out every day. Every day I'm making offers in the places that I'm at, like Facebook and daily emails and so on. And she was having a bit of trouble with the holidays and things, sticking with the one offer a day with it. And I said to her, just imagine I had a briefcase here full of cold hard cash, $1 million. And I said to you, if you post once a day with your offer for the next 30 days, at the end of 30 days, I will give you this cash. The $1 million would be all yours. Would you take it? And she's like, well, yeah, of course. So I said, well, I'm not offering $1 million, but pretend I am. And keep that in mind as we're going through the holidays. Motivation. Well, when you say it's a little busy, I got a family gathering, whatever, you do have to play a bit of a Jedi mind trick on yourself. And that's my little mini Luke Skywalker.
There you go.
Guys, from when he was a hermit on the island and all depressed. But speaking of Jedi mind tricks, you do have to play a Jedi mind trick on yourself. And there's a little one. I know it sounds silly, but I have told clients, imagine there's that pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, the briefcase with $1 million, if for 30 days you stick to whatever and build those habits.
Yeah, to me, this is one of my big things when I work with aspiring first-time business owners. Discipline comes into play, but sacrifice. What are you willing to sacrifice of what you currently do today? For some people, that's, am I willing to sacrifice sitting on the couch watching TV? And sometimes even it's about sacrificing some time with the people that you'd like to spend time with, right? What are you willing to sacrifice? Because if you, like, going back to the point of you're starting a side hustle and those 20 hours a week, probably you have got to sacrifice the other things you were doing with those 20 hours a week, right? And sometimes it's after you've put the kids to bed and now you work another few hours, or it's on the weekends, or it's when you would have been watching football or whatever it is. what are you willing to sacrifice to get that $1 million at the end of the rainbow? Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because we have a little comment that just popped up. It was quite apropos from one of the viewers who's telling us that we should be spending the day with our families. But, I'm divorced. And so my kids are with their mom today, and I get them tomorrow afternoon, and I have them for the next couple of days. So I won't be working in that time. I will be spending time with the family. But, the whole thing about driving my business is to, create information that people are going to find useful, so that when they're ready for my services, that I'm the one that they want to work with. And so, organizing this thing today, I thought would be fun, and I'm having fun. And, I can see my email from here. I mean, as the day has gone by, the frequency of new emails arriving is just slowing right down. I mean, everywhere out there, it's Christmas Eve. The whole thing is grinding to a halt. Businesses are closing early. And so if I wasn't doing this thing with you guys, I don't know. I'm doing.
You'd be drunk in the corner somewhere.
Exactly. I think it's a great prompt, because this is something I'm so passionate about, and I know you guys are as well, David. So my daughter's in town from college. She got home last Monday, so not this past Monday, but the Monday before. She has a month break, and I did some work this morning. I did some work over the weekend while she was sleeping. I've got some calls I've scheduled Friday, but I have the luxury of, for the most part, for these 4 weeks that she's here, to spend as much time, more time than she wants, right? Yeah. Like she needs a break. Like she's upstairs now working on something, and she's like, Dad, I'm good. We're going on a cruise, a week-long cruise that starts on Sunday. So I'll be gone for a whole week. Tomorrow we travel to see family. I am able to do that because because I own my own businesses. Yeah. And I have made certain sacrifices, but this is what it gives me, is the time with my family. So just because we're here today and we blocked out this time doesn't mean that we don't have ample time with our family. And to us, this is the end game, is the time that it does give us. Yeah.
Yeah. And full disclosure, I mean, Dave and I have been friends for years. Henry, I know you. So if it was Joe Blow, who I didn't know, that reached out and said, hey, Mark, on Christmas Eve, do you want to pop on and do it?
I would say
knowing me, I probably would still. I don't like to get rusty if I'm taking too much time off. but it's day, with you guys, that's a little different. Seth Godin told a story once. He was in a hotel lobby somewhere warm and whatever, on vacation, and he had his laptop out in the lobby, and husband and wife walked by, and he overheard her say to her husband, oh, isn't that sad? He's on vacation, he has to do this. And what Seth Godin said is, actually, no, what's sad is that couple has to work for 50 weeks of the year so they could get their 2 weeks a year off at a job that they probably hate. Yeah. Now, I'm probably butchering it. I'm kind of just giving the summary of it, but that I always remember that story.
No, that's a perfect summation of it. Is that's what it's about. Yeah. I would much rather be taking time where it makes sense, and I'm not sacrificing much of it all with personal time to continue building a business. And to Mark's point, I only did this because I know David and I thought it would be fun and I have the time. If we had been traveling, I would have said no. But yeah, that's what it's all about, is the flexibility that this gets us. And I get to do this again and again and again. We went up for a parents' weekend to my daughter's senior year. So it'll be the last parents' weekend. And we were the only parents that got to go. We were almost up there for almost like a week, right? We weren't squeezing in on a Friday afternoon and leaving on a Sunday. And listen, that's what you have to do. I'm not downgrading that. I'm just saying I'm fortunate that that's what this provides me. This lifestyle lets me do that. So spending time with family is what it gets for all of us.
Yeah.
Now we're going to talk about our ex-wives for the rest of the show.
I don't have one yet, so I don't have one to talk about.
You will today after you're here on Christmas Eve. You might get served with some papers, Henry, when you get off here.
Damn, Mark, that's harsh. I've had the door locked, so maybe
I actually am, and my ex and I get along really well. They invited me to play Risk, and the board game. Her and my little guy are playing, and I said, no, I'm actually hopping on here, but I will be opening gifts with them tomorrow morning. So I'm not going to be under the tree doing a Facebook Live or typing out emails. I'll actually be fully engaged. But for today, hey, it's Christmas Eve. It's not Christmas Day.
So I just finished over the last couple of weeks recording 9 of my holiday chat hour-long conversations. I think most of them are with people who want to buy a business. And most of them, when we talked about motivation, number one motivation, more control over time.
Of course. I mean,
Right.
I think that's the number one thing. That freedom of time and location, I think, is top with most people that you talk to that either have a business or aspire to have a business. What's sad is that we also talk to a lot of people who are in a business that's consuming them. And
Yes.
they've ended up with a, worse paying job than the one they had before. That's where, we try to help those people, and it's unfortunate. But also I had a coaching session yesterday with a client and wanted to get it in before the end of the year. And it was so rewarding just to hear how much I've been able to help her. And so when we get that feedback, like you talked about earlier, David, that makes it worthwhile as well. Hey, before I forget, I want to come back to the question about franchising when you're ready, because I have some further thoughts on franchising. So let me know
sure.
when you want to.
Mark, before you came on, we were talking about Tide. Procter & Gamble and Tide have created a new Tide dry cleaning franchise. So what did you want to add, Henry?
Just that on franchising, I've got a lot of experience there, and I've helped a lot of people, and I've had that topic on this show, and I've done a webinar similar to the one you and I did on buying a business. What I challenge everybody when they're evaluating the franchise, because I also see so many people getting into bad franchises. It's really depressing. But there are 4 things that I would challenge you to evaluate when you're looking at a franchise. Number 1 is the value of the brand. What value does that brand bring you either now or eventually? So my office, Evolution, is a good example. They have a small footprint in Florida, but growing rapidly. We'll be the first one to open in South Florida, but there's already 7 others lined up. So eventually there's a value of brand recognition for me. So that's one thing to look at. The second, and probably the most important reason we go with a franchise, is their systems. So the advantage should be that I don't necessarily have to know anything about that industry. The franchisor will teach me. They will train me. They will hold my hand. They've developed the systems. They've worked it out. And they've got a business model that, if I follow the rules, should result in similar results, right? So that system is critical, but the system encompasses everything from that initial training to the hand-holding to the ongoing development of those systems. So that's number 2. Number 3 is the leverage. So if we talk about the Tide example, joining that larger organization might give me leverage over chemicals, equipment, what have you, that, as Henry's dry cleaner, I may not have access to. With OE, for example, one of the services I can sell is a phone answering service. Mm-hmm. Well, I can't build that on my own, right? I just can't scale to a fully automated and live answered system that's going to answer the phone 24/7. But paying into the franchise, the franchisor can provide that for me. So that's an example of leverage that I can't do on my own. And then the 4th is the network. Even you have to look for that as you begin to evaluate a franchise when you're talking to other franchisees. That network of support of other owners that needs to be fostered by the franchisor, that's critical to your long-term success. Will there be other people that you can pick up the phone or go visit if they're neighboring franchisees, and you support each other? That's the 4th thing that I look for. So the brand, the systems, the leverage that it might give you, and the network. Not all franchises are going to deliver on all 4 of those things, but you evaluate those 4 things carefully to make sure you're going to get your return on investment.
I couldn't agree with you more. When sort of the summary at the end of the book I wrote, Franchise Warnings, I basically said, you have to look at what do you get for the money you're giving.
That's right.
And what you said about brand, I can relate so many times where we are on the East Coast of Canada, people will buy a franchise from Ontario or from the States, and there isn't another one for 500 kilometers, right? And this standalone person now is trying to create the brand recognition, and they're not close to other locations, and they're kind of waving the flag on their own. Versus the guy, there was a guy here in town, he owned some Subway restaurants, and he sold them, and he opened the first Papa John's. It was the first Papa John's, but everyone who lives here who watches an American television network was totally familiar with the brand because they've been watching the ads for a decade and have never had a chance to access the product. And the day he opened, he was busy.
That's
because
great.
People knew it, and they maybe had always wanted to try it. Maybe they tried it when they were traveling and knew it was a good product. And so big benefits, obviously, from that. And product development, being able to have those seasonal specials and special offers and new products coming down the pipe that a lot of small businesses can't develop on their own. I agree with you, Henry. There's a lot of advantages. And there's a lot of bad ones out there. So you really have to be careful.
Gosh. So many bad franchises out there. It's amazing. And people, the biggest mistake I see people make, and the reason they go for these bad franchises is this huge myth that people assume, oh, it's a franchise, I can't fail. It's amazing to me how often I see that or hear that as to the reason why they paid. I was working with a client who paid an $80,000 franchise for a business that there's no way it could generate in any reasonable amount of time, a return to cover even the franchise fee. Right. Yeah. But it happens again and again. And when I ask these people why, they don't necessarily say it in so many words, but they assumed it was a franchise. It must be safe. They must know what they're doing.
The only reason I can think of that's worse is the people who get into them because they like the product.
Oh, well, yeah, that happens with the food ones, right?
Which is horrible for Tide. You don't want them popping Tide pods while they're,
Oh, God.
One thing we're seeing in our neck of the woods, Dave, I won't mention any businesses, but I noticed some local businesses that have opened that are essentially copying popular franchises. So they were traveling somewhere in the States or whatever, and like, oh, I like this restaurant. I'm basically going to do the exact same thing, except it's not going to be called that, but everything else is the same.
Yeah, there's a couple of burger ones around where there's big sacks of potatoes as you come in. If you recognize that from somewhere in the States.
Yeah, it's called Six Guys. No, I'm just joking.
Something like that. Some number of guys.
It reminds me of the Eddie Murphy film, remember, Coming to America, where he was the African prince.
They're going to do a part 2. He's already filmed it. Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't. But I just remember the restaurant he worked in, McDowell's. Right.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Well, I just finished listening to an audiobook about In-N-Out Burger. And of course, In-N-Out Burgers resisted the calls to franchise. They've kept it in the family, but they've had a heck of a problem because it's such a successful restaurant. People are like fanatical, right? I wish we had one up here. But so their legal department's been really busy with people opening up things like I don't know, In and Go Burger, the same colors and same thing, everything all the same. And they've actually had people working inside their kitchens that were then shipping off samples like the meats and things like that back to Texas. Henry, there's a case in your state. Which is kind of funny to hear that. So
interesting. Yeah, they did come into our Dallas market about 5 or 6 years ago. And it was a huge splash. I mean, lines. They had to have police officers managing traffic. It has since died down and is nowhere near the craziness of it. So it's an interesting thing because, there used to be such a California brand. I used to work for a couple of different Silicon Valley companies, and that was the thing. And so when they came here, it was huge. And now I think they're still busy, but nowhere near, of course, there's no way to sustain that initial euphoria that came with it. So anyway, that was my thought on franchising. And the one of that 4 that really took me longest to appreciate is the networking part of it. And that really, as we were doing the due diligence on Office Evolutions, that really came to mind. I said, wow, how important it is to have that network of other owners to lean on and to learn from.
It was helpful to me when I had my Sunbelt office, that's for sure, to be able to reach out and talk to other office owners.
I imagine so.
Hey, Rick, I see you joined. Is your work today?
Yeah, everything's going.
I can't see your picture, though.
Oh, okay. Hold on.
I was looking at this time. I think I've been on for almost an hour already. So time flies. So I think my slot is about up, right?
Well, it's been great to have you, Henry. Thanks for stopping by.
No pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Great conversation. And so I'll drop off now if that's okay.
Yeah. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Henry.
Bye, guys. Good to see you guys. Thank you.
Hey, Rick. How you doing?
Hey, Rick.
I'm great. Hey, Mark. How you doing, buddy?
I am doing good. Thank you.
Good stuff.
Sorry. I just wanted to introduce you a little bit, Rick. You have been on my YouTube channel a couple of times. And for people that are watching, Rick has a huge entrepreneurial resume. I think you've owned, is it 7 different cafes, restaurants, etc. over the years?
Yeah, it makes me old, I know, but yeah, I've owned 7.
And you are also a partner in the Roy H. Williams Wizard of Ad consultancy.
That's
Did
right.
I say that right? Okay.
Yeah, Wizard of Ads.
Yeah. And on top of that, you also are a coordinator for a local entrepreneurship development program for people that are trying to start their own business and get into self-employment. So thanks for joining us on the show today.
No problem. I'm bringing my buddy with me. It's a SIPA. I haven't tried it yet. It's Coastal Good Life. It is Christmas Eve, and his friends are just over there.
So for everyone's benefit, Rick and I went to a craft beer festival a couple of weeks ago, and it looks like the marketing rubbed off on him.
Could be some dead soldiers in the corner there.
Oh, they're already dead. Those are from weeks past. I've been on a research mission to find out what the heck is so special about craft brews. And I don't mind drinking a brew every once in a while, but it's not necessarily my favorite thing to do every day. But I've learned a lot over the last, when was it, Dave? Back in mid-November, you and I went to that show?
It was, I don't believe it was the weekend of American Thanksgiving. I think it was the week before, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah.
Because I was in the States the week of American Thanksgiving.
Okay.
But yeah, so every once in a while I'll stop off at the liquor store and grab a couple of cans and trying them out, and I've definitely got my favorites. Anyways, I thought I'd share that today. This is my first one, by the way.
Okay. Well, I don't remember reading any fine print with YouTube about drinking on the air, so I think it's fine. There you go. We've been talking about the 2019, and we've been talking about the year ahead. And so what sort of things have you, well, Mark, I forgot to ask you the question. What do you see coming for the year ahead in the coaching world?
Boys, I think a really big trend, which I'm doing myself, I'm hopping on the whole mastermind bandwagon. So that's I've heard the word mastermind more in the last few months than I probably had the previous few years before that. So I think that's now, of course, mastermind, that term gets jumbled, and I think a lot of them aren't true masterminds. It would probably be more group coaching, but I'm starting mastermind in January, and I know a number of peers who are as well. It's funny, I hear people saying that the coaching world is oversaturated. There's too many coaches, and I view it differently. I say more people are knowing what coaching is now, and it's becoming more accepted out in the mainstream. So I think that right now it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of growth to be had with it. So I'm excited. Yeah.
Do you ever go on Quora.com?
I do, yes.
So there was someone posted a question there the other day, and it was a woman who asked, how can I grow my business if I can't afford a business coach? And I read the question. I was like, wow, that's interesting. So here, to your point about more people learning about coaching, this is a person who was actually thinking that it was a necessary thing, right? And other people had answered the question before I saw it, and people were putting things like, well, people have been growing businesses before there's been business coaches and stuff, do some reading, get a mentor, stuff like that. But it's interesting how the terminology really is starting to spread, and perpetuate everything.
It is. And without getting into my whole interesting backstory, Dave and Rick, as you know, I was in real estate before and went through a messy business closure. But a few years before that happened, a coach came into my office, and I had no clue what the heck coaching was, right? And he wanted to work with me. And me being, 20 something, full of piss and vinegar, think I knew everything. I thought, like, gee, take a look around, buddy. Why would I need a coach, and shooing him away. A couple years later, as I'm in a different position going through the business closure, I thought, God, I wish I had taken him up on that offer. Now, assuming he was good, of course, maybe he wasn't, but that could have saved me a lot of heartache and headache having a good coach in my corner back then. So I always remember that story, and I pass it along to people when the business owner says, well, why would I need a coach? They're worried about payroll, office lease, all that. A good coach is going to give you many times over, for your return on investment. A good coach, of course, not a mediocre coach.
Absolutely. It's interesting because, I've known you for years, and Rick, you and I talk on the phone all the time. We talk about things going on in our businesses. But I became part of a formal coaching arrangement back in July. And, I hesitated to write the check. There was no check. I paid with a credit card on an online form, but, within the first 3 months, I can say that I've probably gotten back 3 to 4 times what I invested. And what it has done for me in my business is I like to create, and I enjoy creating. And the coaching process allowed me to focus on the things that I was already doing that were working really well, and to sort of double down on what already works and maybe grow things instead of spending time trying to grow new things. And so that was only in July, and I changed my strategy for the second half of the year, and it worked. The things that I was focusing on have grown more. And so it's paid off for me, that's for sure.
Yeah, it takes sometimes a second pair of eyes, someone away from you, because I found most coaches are great at helping other people. It's just with themselves that they're a little, they can't see the forest for the trees, right? They're too close to the situation. But when they have somebody else that's there that can point out things, and I've been in the same position, Dave, with some people who I've benefited from and give me that different perspective. So that's where a good coach helps is sometimes you're up in your head too. I say you in general, you're up in your head too much and you can't see certain things. You got blind spots. A good coach will point them out.
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, I got a question for you. I've known you for a couple of years now and been following you online. You talk about a good coach, and I stress the word good. What's the difference between any coach and a good coach?
Well, I'm not in the school of thought where some people say the coach has to have done something that they're helping people with. That being said, if they have $8 in their bank account, they say they help people get to 7 figures and beyond, there's probably a disconnect there as well. So there's certain skills. I mean, a good coach is a good listener. Obviously, like I mentioned previously, they can help point out blind spots. And, I'm a little different. I've had people say with me as well, Mark, what you do is more coach salting. It's kind of combining the two, because it's not just me sitting there peppering them with questions and that's it. I do actually give them a framework to go off to. And I say, look, I don't care really what you call it. In my view, a coach helps someone get from point A to point B, and it's not some mystical art like the Force in Star Wars, which a lot of coaches try to make it sound like, right?
Well, I mean, in your practice, Mark, you have a lot of people who want to be like life coaches and relationship coaches and all these sort of touchy-feely life aspect kind of things. And what you help them do is realize that they own a business.
Yeah.
Right.
I always ask them, why did you start a coaching business? I don't say, why are you a coach, or why did you become a coach? Now, that may not seem like much a difference to say coach or coaching business, but I tie the two words together because it is a business. You're an entrepreneur first and foremost. Coaches are really bad. There's a lot of messed up feelings around money and blocks. And a lot of coaches think that you can't charge much, or you're greedy Gordon Gekko, J.R. Ewing type thing. Or if you charge a good amount, then you're not, you're somehow, do I have an echo there? You guys hear an echo? A little bit of one. Okay.
But basically, you shouldn't be like Mother Teresa. You should be willing and able to charge a good amount for what you're doing, because you're bringing a lot of value out.
Yeah, if you are out of business, you can't help anyone. And that's the same for any kind of business out there.
There's a saying: if you can't light up the world if you can't pay your light bill. Now, I'll admit one of my bulbs burned out like literally an hour before we hopped out here. I thought I'm not going on the road to get a bulb on Christmas Eve. So it is a little dark here, but the quote is still a good quote that, yeah, you can't light up the world if you can't pay your light bill.
Well, we are pretty far north. The sun is actually setting right now.
Gets dark around 1:30, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
I see Dustin just joined from Winnipeg, and it's pretty cold, and it won't be getting dark there soon for a couple of hours, I think. But I was talking with someone in Winnipeg the other day who said it was like minus 30 C. So it's much colder out there than it is down here for us anyway.
Yeah, right around 0 degrees today, I think, or -1.
Yeah, I still went out for my walk.
Yeah.
Rick, what were some of the highlights for you in 2019?
Holy cow. There was a ton, Dave. We bought another business in January of 2019. And so that it was a seasonal business that generates a little over $500,000 a year. And so that was our first season in operation. My wife joined the business and started working in that operation. Other than that, well, I mean, there's some downsides, but upsides at the same time. So it's hard to explain which is which, or understand which is which. So we had a devastating fire at one of our businesses, and it shut us down for most of the year. So right now I have 3 restaurants on the go. One has been shut down due to a fire. And just dealing with that and understanding, not only the legal ramifications, but insurance law, bank law, a lot of different things have come at me that I didn't really understand before. And just putting it in perspective. And I learned something. I was talking to the RCMP, and I haven't talked to you about this yet, but I learned something about private equity firms. And it was really interesting to understand. Like, I'm a big learner, right? So learning about private equity and I have a finance background, so understanding how that kind of works and how they're in the market and they're buying up some of these bigger corporations in our local towns. It was interesting, and understanding how they're what their goal is as a private equity firm. So, anyways, just a huge year in learning. But yeah, we did open another business, and we lost one to a fire. But 2020 just makes me decide what we're going to do with that business. Whether we're going to rebuild, whether we're going to pivot, if we're going to evolve and grow past the original operation that was there. There's just a lot of questions that I don't have answers to today. But yeah, 2020 should be cool.
It's interesting what you say about insurance, because I mean, I've been in business before, and I was told get E&O insurance or get liability insurance, and you go talk to the broker, and of course you start to talk about price, and they put forms in front of you and you sign them, right?
Yep.
And it's only when something like this comes up that you start to wonder what all those words were, that you put your name under. And I've got a friend who's in the construction business, and they had a tower crane up in Halifax when Hurricane Dorian came through, and it fell over, and it crashed into a building. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, then the words in their insurance were very, very important, and they're covered, and the property will be repaired, and the crane will be replaced, and all that kind of stuff. It's going to be okay. But do you know what they found in their insurance coverage?
What's that?
They found that there was a clause saying that the insurance didn't cover any faults or failings in engineering work that their firm did, because they're a construction firm, but they're owned by an engineer who does engineering all the time. So they found out, because of this mishap with the crane, that they were exposed in ways they never even understood. And so they fixed it. They bought a better insurance policy, but without really getting into understanding what hazards may exist and what you're actually covered for, it was scary. When he was telling me the story, it was frightening.
Well, and if you have,
I'm not even in the business.
Well, exactly. And I've learned more about insurance in the last 6 months than I ever wanted to learn. I didn't get in the insurance business. But simple things like, if you have a business and it's operating in a different way than you originally intended it to, your insurance might not cover you.
Wow. So what kind of variation might cause that? Because in that business, it was a seafood business, but you introduced like ice cream and stuff like that.
Yeah. So let's say I had, because I did have extra space in that building. let's say I had converted that space into a lumber yard, like
Or
whatever, right?
microbrewery. How about
A microbrewery, great example.
Or a
So I can, or what?
brothel. You
Oh,
weren't doing a brothel, were you?
that's illegal, Mark. We
Mark,
can't do
stop.
that. Nothing will cover us in illegal activities. But in a microbrewery, so if I decided to build a microbrewery and we were in the process of building it up, and a devastating thing like a fire happened, I might not be covered, especially if my insurance wasn't aware of that extra extension that I had decided to renovate in my building. When we had the fire, the first thing they asked me was, there anything in this room that wasn't part of your operations? I'm like, well, what do you mean? They're like, well, did you have anything in here that wasn't part of restaurants? So did you have any 2x4 that you were just storing in here? I'm like, well, why would I have 2x4? They're like, well, we just need to know. Come to find out, after I did my research, they wanted to know if I had any flammable substance in there that would have caught fire, and then I would be liable for the fire instead of them, insuring me.
Yeah, because they're looking for an opportunity to reduce the check they have to write, aren't they?
That's right. Yep.
Yep.
I remember the story about Thomas Edison when his laboratory burnt down. It was his whole life work, like how many thousands of patents did the man have and everything else. And as it was being consumed with flames, his family or whatever said, what now? And he said, well, tomorrow we rebuild. And I thought, wow, that would be kudos to him for having that point of view or that mentality, but that's tough when he's watched his whole life work going up in flames. So yeah, good luck with it though, Rick. I heard about it on the news, so it's crazy.
Yeah, ours is a little bit different situation than Edison's, but yeah, I mean, the real issue we have to decide on is it worth rebuilding? I mean, I want to rebuild, but is it worth it at this point?
Yeah.
And then there's questions of like, because the building at one time was a hardware store or something, wasn't it?
Many moons ago, yeah.
Yeah. So if you are faced with starting from scratch, does that mean there's an opportunity to reorient the property, build a building that makes more sense, or whatever?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's nothing but positive that's going to come out of this. I mean, it was devastating and it was somewhat shocking. But when we look at the opportunity and behind it, so your listeners are aware, Dave, we were a victim of arson, and someone has decided to burn down our business, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And it happens. It's the first time something like this has ever happened to me, but I've heard of these stories before from different, entrepreneurs and different biographies that you read. And the question is, okay, we want to rebuild, but at what point are we going to take that risk with this unknown arsonist out there? And so there is one idea that we're playing with right now of taking a trucking container, they're made out of steel, and put it on the site, and try to burn that down, mofo.
Well,
I hope he's not watching. I don't want,
I don't care. Hey, Mark, bring it on, baby.
Hey, Henry Lopez was talking about the small audiences. There you go. That's what we want. And what about the Wizard of Ads stuff? And maybe why don't you tell everyone a little bit about Roy H. Williams for people that don't know?
Oh God, where do I start? I mean, Roy is a marketing genius. He has 3 books on the New York Times bestseller list that he basically converted his blogs back in the 80s to a book. And then from those books sprung out Wizard Academy, and Roy was doing marketing consulting. And eventually he realized that one day he wasn't going to be able to do the consulting that he wanted to do, but he wanted his philosophies and his theories to continue on. So he started bringing on partners, and the partners are now kind of like prophets or his apostles. And so we go down there a couple times a year and hang out with Roy and learn new things and get access to some of the new things that he is studying.
And this is all in Austin.
It's
Texas.
all in Austin, Texas. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then take that information and apply it back to our own client list. So it's not a franchise; it's more like an affiliation. Mm-hmm. And there's a percentage of fees that go back to the home office of what we charge our clients. But basically, it has allowed Roy to touch multiple countries all over the planet, working with his partners.
No, it's really cool. And so what kinds of businesses have you been working with?
Well, because I'm in the restaurant business, it's easy to get into retail, right? So we've been working a lot with retail. I have one consultant that I was working with on the restaurant side. So he was building galleys on ships, and he was working primarily with the Canadian Navy and doing some other things with shipbuilding. And so we were helping him really clarify his message. You know, he only has potentially 5 customers in Canada. So he really needs, you know, it's not like we're going to go on the radio and talk about his message. He's just got to be clear that when his potential customers sees or hears of him, that they remember him.
Yeah.
So those are pretty much it at this point. I've got my partners have tons of clients in plumbing and air conditioning and ice cream, which is kind of cool because I love ice cream almost as much as I love beer. And Roy's done a ton of work on jewelry, like the different jewelers selling diamonds and gold bracelets and so on.
It's funny because you and I went to the craft beer event. We tasted a whole bunch of different kinds of beer from all these little microbreweries.
Yeah.
And then I wrote an email to my email list, which hopefully everyone signs up for because the holiday chat recordings start getting released tomorrow. And it only goes to people on the list, davidcbarnettlist.com. I sent out an email to the list talking about how the number of microbreweries here where we live has gone from 28 to 60 in a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that email gets sent out on Twitter. And so one of my Twitter followers who lives in Vermont replied to it. And he said that he was asked to look at 4 different failing microbreweries in the past 12 months. And so, you know, there definitely are certain jurisdictions where there's, you know, a saturation point's been reached, and there just isn't enough room for more different stuff, I guess.
Well, it was funny because I just heard on a podcast yesterday the emergence of microbreweries, especially on the east coast of Canada, fall in line perfectly with local purchases, and they're attributing it to the hipster movement. Which I thought was really interesting because it does make sense. So, you know, just the millennials and the hipster movement just taking over another piece of our lives.
Okay, boomer. No, just kidding.
I'm not. I'm an X, man. I'm an X.
Well, you know what's funny, though, is because we're all close to the same age, all 3 of us. And when I was in university, there was a different group that we were a part of. They used to call it Gen Y. And if you recall, they were saying the difference between Generation X and Generation Y is that Generation Y graduated university the year the boomers started to retire. Because one of the defining characteristics of Generation X is that they were getting out of college with their degrees, but the, you know, management positions of the big companies were still filled with the baby boomers. And so there was no room for the Xers to kind of get into the corporate ladder. And so that's where you ended up with the first college educated people having to go to Starbucks and McDonald's and kind of doing these wage roles where, you know, they were all expecting to get better careers. And then a year or 2 before I graduated from university, that's when the boomers started to retire. And then all of a sudden, you know, things opened up, and the poor Generation Xers, you know, their degrees were years old and they didn't have relevant experience. And so these new kids, my cohort out of university, were able to get right into those corporate positions. And then they changed it. The millennials made such a loud noise, they got rid of Generation Y. And I think that we need our own generation again because I feel special.
Well, you know, if you read anything about generational theory, they'll tell you that Gen X is going to be the silent generation. So we're basically getting skipped over. We're not going to do anything significant.
Again, small podcast audiences, right?
I don't agree with those statements, but that's the theory.
Now, Dave, I'm wondering if I'm past my time. I just got looking. I've been on for almost an hour as well, so I don't want to cut into Rick's.
No, it's we're getting to the time that we had planned anyway. So, why don't we just start wrapping it up? Rick, what does your crystal ball hold for 2020? What do you think are going to be some of the big trends for the coming year?
Just general trends?
Yeah.
That's a great question, Dave. Well, I know that labor force is still shrinking and we're still going to have some major problems. I'm not sure it's going to be solved in 2020, but there has to be some more automation at the service level of things. When you look at McDonald's and other fast food joints moving to automation and having, an iPad or a cellular phone mobile order happen, that's gonna continue to alleviate the pressure of the workforce, definitely. I think there's going to be a move on the food side to, again, this whole microbrewery, the slow food movement, I think is going to come back.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to see this hipster type thing that's going on with beers and locally owned foods to make a comeback. I think, if we look at the market, we're more affluent than we've ever been, and we have more money, and we don't need to spend on $12 burgers at McDonald's. We'll spend it on, $25 steaks at some local place.
Did you see the Wall Street? Did you see the Wall Street Journal article that came out a couple days ago?
No.
It was a big article, and it's about down at the Los Alamos National Laboratory, where they have a lot of hazardous waste from nuclear type experimentation. They've had such a hard time finding employees that they've decided to introduce what they're calling employee boot camps, where they teach people how to do the jobs. And I think it's funny because it's the application of all this sort of trendy words to talk about employers training their employees how to do work, which is the oldest thing ever, because you're talking about apprenticeship, right?
Yeah.
Where you find a bright, capable, enthusiastic person and you teach them how to do the job.
Oh, and I saw something yesterday, and I don't know if you're aware of this. I was blown away. Recycling. We've been talking about recycling now for 40 years, right? The first Earth Day was in the 80s. And did you know that China actually was importing 79% of all plastics for recycling? And
I knew it headed over in that direction, yeah.
And at the start of this year, the government of China has banned any future importing of plastics.
Well, this is why you're seeing a movement towards cities and provinces and states banning single-use plastics. The city of St. John, they announced that the recycling program wasn't going to accept the grocery bags anymore. But all the major grocery chains around here have said that they're going to phase them out in January anyway. There's no market for it to go to anymore. There's no place for it to be recycled here. And quite frankly, where the three of us live anyway, we're in the middle of the woods. There are pulp mills, there are sawmills producing sawdust, which is turned into pulp. Why aren't we using paper bags?
Right on.
Right? And then we know that they'll decompose.
Well, in this article that I was reading, plastic bags actually aren't even recycled anyways. They actually only take the bigger, heavier plastic jugs, like for laundry detergent and so on. And so it was only 9% of all plastics is actually being recycled. It's insane, right? And I think there's going to be a move now that China has basically said, we're not accepting this. Mm-hmm. Somewhere else in the world, Malaysia, it looks like they're trying to get involved in it. Not sure if they will or not, because the government's getting pushed back from their citizens. But somewhere in North America, we're the biggest culprit, right? North American, we're pigs when it comes to plastic. And at some point, I think someone's going to figure out, how do I recycle this here locally instead of shipping it overseas?
Or we'll stop using them.
And to play that advocate, though, when it comes to the whole climate, not to get political, Dave, I haven't got political yet today, but if you look overall when it comes to carbon footprint and everything else, India and China are by far the worst, offenders. So it's great that we're taking steps. The U.S. has reduced its carbon emissions, I forget what percent or whatever, but until those big guys start doing something over there, doesn't matter. I refuse to drink with a paper straw. I'll just say I'm done. I'll drink from this, I guess. But yeah, I'm not going to ditch my plastic straws. I admit it.
I have some stainless steel ones. They work really well.
Oh, really?
Mark, you're absolutely right. I mean, if you look at the world population, 3 billion of the 7.5 billion people on the planet live in those two countries. And I agree with you in terms of, environmental change. Until you can get those two countries on board, everything we do is it's microscopic.
So before we started today, I for some reason thought that there might be periods of silence where people didn't know what to say or talk about. So I looked up a bunch of articles that I thought were interesting. And one of them is about the environmental impact of streaming, like Netflix and Disney Plus and everything. And it's starting to become an issue because when you're watching a movie at your house and then I start watching the same movie 5 minutes later, it's like on old broadcast networks, it was one emission of data going to everybody. But now there's a server sending bits to you and a server sending bits to me. And in order to support all these streaming services, the footprints and the size of these data farms has just been growing like crazy, and they generate a lot of heat and they use a lot of energy. And so it's actually starting to register as, when they look at the industries that are using energy and polluting, information is starting to appear as one of these things. I was taken aback by it. I didn't really think of it that way because I just think about a computer sitting on my desk and I know it doesn't use very much wattage, but
this is
the other end of the communication network is using a huge amount of power.
So blame Baby Yoda for all the problems, right, with the climate. It's all Baby Yoda's fault.
Right. If we banned memes, we could cut down on half the streaming.
Well, hey, listen, 100 streaming services now too, so that's what people are saying. It's going to eventually go back to cable once everybody gets together. But I've got Disney Plus, I've got Amazon Prime, I've got Netflix. I can't keep track of all of them, but yeah.
Well, 15 years ago, I read an article, and I haven't looked back on it, but it was talking about white noise and all these frequencies that were on the radio that used to be able to have access to. Like they're totally ready for Wi-Fi, and all this stuff's going to come through Wi-Fi maybe one day. Who knows? But Dave, there's things that are said about not in my backyard. Let's fix the garbage problem, but don't put it in my backyard. I'll be the first to say if people are having a problem with heat of these servers, put it in my backyard because in the wintertime I'd love to have that heat.
Yeah.
Your viewer from Winnipeg, he'll take all of them. Yeah.
I didn't want to put it on him, right? I didn't want to put it on him. I'll take it in my backyard. But I'm sure Winnipeg could use it too.
All right, guys. I think this was a lot of fun. Thank you for joining, and thanks for the viewers who are watching and everyone who watches the recording afterwards. And if you have to do some traveling over the holidays, maybe this is something that people can listen to on the way. I don't know. But I had a lot of fun today, and I'm going to go watch Star Wars.
I'm going to finish this beer. See what it says? Coastal Good Life. SIPA. There we go.
Beer. I'm the only Canadian that hates beer. I hate beer, coffee. I'm going to lose my Canadian citizenship.
I revoke it right now.
Yeah. Beer and coffee. I'm the only Canadian that hates both. Yeah.
And you don't like maple syrup either, do you?
I like hockey, so there I'm safe. But
there you go.
Wine's okay, but that's it.
All right, everyone. Have a great
Thanks, Dave.
night and a Merry Christmas, and I hope Santa finds you all.
Merry Christmas, guys. Thanks, Dave.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.